Friends, today we're talking about the portion of Shemini, and we're talking about the 26th gift. And the 26th gift is about differentiation or separation. We'll start off with a small story. There was a big game, a basketball game, and the person got a courtside seat, and he was sitting right there in the front row, and the whole place was packed, jammed, and there was only one seat next to him that was empty. Everybody was wondering, what is that empty seat? How is it possible that in such an important game, the playoffs, there is an empty seat next to him? So the game goes on, and the guy that's sitting next to the empty seat is a big fan. He's cheering for his team. The guy behind him asks him, listen, I'm wondering, I'm puzzled. How'd you get a free seat next to you? Who's this seat belong to? So he said, listen, it's a very sad story. 30 years, me and my wife are big basketball fans, and this is her seat. So says the man, where is she? Well, unfortunately, he says, she passed away. Oh, I'm sorry to hear. Moments go by, and the guy behind him is very curious. Okay, she died, but he taps the guy on the shoulder and says, listen, I'm very sorry to ask you this, but you know how much this seat cost? It cost $1,000. You could have sold it, you could give it to a friend. This is a very important seat. Couldn't you give it to someone? Where's all your friends? He says, well, all my friends and family at this moment are at her funeral. Now, we can take this as a joke, and it is a joke, but it's not so far-fetched that we meet people like that in our life, that don't set their priorities right, that don't differentiate between what is right and what is wrong, and between time for a funeral or time for the playoffs. So today we're going to talk about differentiation. In Hebrew we call it havdalah, and we find two terms, or twice, that it is mentioned in our portion. One, when the two sons of Aaron died, and the verse tells us and commands us to differentiate between the sacred and the mundane, and between the pure and the impure. And the second time, in the end of the portion, where we see a whole list of animals that we can eat and not eat, the Torah ends and says, I command you to differentiate between the pure and impure, and between the animal that you can eat and consume, and between the animal that you cannot consume. In both cases, the Torah calls the person, the scrolls call the person to differentiate between two aspects. What is that differentiation? We start off our life with separation, with differentiating between ourselves and what is outside of us. When we create the self, the I, that's exactly what we do. We look at the outside world and we see this is the outside world, and this is how I perceive the outside world. You differentiate both, and that's how you create yourself, the I, the self. That's the first step of a person. And then comes the rest of his life. And the rest of his life is made up of small incidences that he perceives the world, and he has an opinion about the world, and he has a knowledgeable, how should I say it? A knowledgeable take on the world and an outlook on the world. And that is because he knows how to separate what he sees from himself. That's the first stage of a person, and that's how he carries out throughout his life. Two main individuals in the 20th century talked about differentiation. One of them was Dr. Isaac Raphael Etzion. He was the winner of the Israel Prize in 1979. And there he makes a differentiation in the term to differentiate. And he says there are two types of differentiations. One is the dissecting one, and one is the comparable one. Which means, if you have a body, let's say a tree, and you dissect it and you differentiate between the bark of the tree, the stem of the tree, the leaves, that is called dissecting this body or this organ. The other one is the comparable one. when you compare two objects, big house, small house, an orange and a tree, and you differentiate between them two. And the reason why he brought this this thought is he wanted to teach school teachers, religious ones, how to reach God on a higher plane, on a higher level. And he says those that teach sciences in religious schools should do as follows: take science and not just include it in one big theory, but take and dissect, whether you dissect and then you differentiate between one body into little parts, or you take and compare two bodies and see the difference between them. But you have to differentiate. And the reason why is because once you differentiate, and let me read you his words, once you differentiate, the differentiation creates a higher level of knowledge. And in his case, a higher level of knowledge of God. For religious teachers that said that God created everything, once you understand how every little mechanism works, the leaf and the bark and the tree and the animal, and you differentiate between them, and it's not only included as God created everything and everything is fine and dandy. No, there is this part, and this is how it works, and this is how this organism works, and that organism works. The more you differentiate, the more you reach a higher level of knowledge. So that's the first individual, the first thinker that we introduced today. The second one is the famous Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, the rabbi of the land of Israel up to 1935. And he says as follows. He gives a parable. He says, in order to see and to create a unison opinion, you need to differentiate opinions into segments, and only then you can see the broader picture. And he gives the parable of a garden. If you want to see a harmony in a garden, a beautiful garden, you can't just have chaos, plants growing all over each other. You need to see different plants growing next to each other, the lilies and the tulips and other flowers that are growing one next to each other and are differentiated and are separated from one another. Only then you see a beautiful garden. So is the case with opinions. When you include everything into one rough inclusion, without separating between the things first, that creates a greater separation, and that greater separation starts a downhill downfall. And he brings a verse from the sages, and the sages say, if there's no differentiation, there's no knowledge. And we say, if there's no knowledge, there's no differentiation. And both go hand in hand. So both of them, Rav Kook and Dr. Etzion, say something very profound. And that is, we need to differentiate in our lives. And the Torah deals with three aspects of life that we need to differentiate in. And that is time, space, and man, or humanity. In time, we must understand that if all time for us is the same, if the time for the birthday of our children is the same as the time of birthday of our close friends, or the time with your wife that you go on a romantic dinner is the same time, as important as a dinner with a colleague, then that time is not sacred time. If you don't know how to differentiate between time with your wife and time with your friends, then you're living on a roller coaster, a linear one, that goes up and down and is heading towards chaos. If you know how to differentiate and sanctify your time, then your time gets more of a meaning. Same goes for the Sabbath and the rest of the days. If you behave on the Sabbath or any other day that you want to dedicate for yourself as a day of rest, if you act in that day the same way you act in all other days, answer emails, go to work, do whatever you do in regular days, it's not a special day. And therefore, there's no meaning to that day. So that's in terms of time. but also in terms of space. No one is going to act in a graveyard like he's acting in an amusement park. It's a sacred place. No one is going to act in his bedroom like he's acting in his living room. There you host guests. In your living room, in your bedroom, you go to sleep. So there are places that you have to differentiate and separate in order for them to have meaning. And also for a human being. All humans were created equal, but your reactions to them and the way that you relate to them have a different meaning. A king is not similar to a commoner, or a doctor is not considered as a garbage collector. Yes, they're equal. Yes, they have rights, but your reaction to them and the fact that you do not put them into one category and you separate between them gives meaning to the profession, gives meaning to your relation with other people. And therefore, the more you differentiate, the more you separate, the more your life gets a better meaning. And Judaism and the Torah in this week's portion is a boot camp, training camp for differentiation. Because not all animals are permitted to eat. Not all the animal kingdom has to be on your plate. There are kosher ones, there are ones that are not kosher. Not all the times are sanctified. Not all the people are of a holy stature. Not all the places are a sanctuary. And the more you differentiate, the more you get a meaning to your life. In this day and age in postmodernism, where the big sport is to just, slaughter holy cows, as we say, we have a big issue because we try to make everything equal. Everything is the same. There's no importance to anything. And with that, we are faced with the greatest challenge of the 21st century, the meaning of life. So the Torah is calling us out today and saying, you want to have more meaning to your life? Start differentiating. Start separating time, space, humans. And once you differentiate, you'll have a better meaning to your life. And it starts with a small step. Start with the circle method. The inner circle has to be you and your family. That's what's important. And no one can interfere. And then you move on to your friends, to your nation. And then you move on to the animal kingdom. And then you move on to vegetation, etc., etc. If you know how to separate them, your world will have a whole different meaning. So this week's portion's gift is about differentiation. In Hebrew, havdalah.